I'm Scott Wilkins with Backstage View. We are sitting here with Mark Fields and Tony Trishka, and we just sat through a fantastic movie that was just put out. Mark, tell us all about this great documentary that you have put out, please.
Well, Give Me the Banjo was the product of over a decade of work on the history of the banjo from its African roots to the present, and I did it in collaboration with Tony here, who was the initial inspiration for it and the rabbi for the project along the way. It was shown on PBS in 2011 with narration by Steve Martin, and also he appears in it performing with Steve Canyon Rangers.
It was an amazing film. Rabbi, would you like to tell us some more about it?
This is something I'm discovering today, that I'm a rabbi.
Yeah.
I'm not even Jewish, but that's fine.
Well, the
gladly accept
IBMA's,
the nomenclature.
strange things happen at the IBMA.
I know. I'm finding my true religion. What's the question?
I don't know. How the movie, you put it together, what was it that you did? I know you were in the movie a lot.
I made some phone calls is what I did. Mark did all the heavy lifting for years, you know. And I'm not just being modest or whatever. He really did. I connected him to certain people like Steve Martin and Earl Scruggs and J.D. Crowe and folks like that I happen to know. And I did some of the music, some of the background music.
It seemed extremely historical from a perspective. We were just speaking before that even if you're not a musician, you're going to get a lot out of this. Just historically, learning where the banjo's from, how it came into our country, and how things changed, and yet how things didn't change also in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, that was part of why. I mean, all of the things that I've done have been trying to put music and the arts in context, in a cultural context. And it's, something where I've become very aware of the fact that I think both the best aspects and the worst aspects of American culture can be shown through, through the music, the popular music. And, it was something where there are a lot of categories that people place music in, and in the process they lose sight of just how much of a continuum there is in the development of, all different styles and many of them all at the same time. But they're, everybody's trying to pigeonhole it and saying, these are, this is folk music, or, this is blues. So the banjo just became a different way of slicing the orange as far as American music as a whole.
Tony, you're the banjo extraordinaire, and I asked this earlier when you guys were taking a Q&A, but just I think it's interesting of how you got into the banjo, and could you repeat that?
Sure. Through the Kingston Trio, big folk group in the late 50s, early 60s, and they had a banjo player named Dave Guard who took a solo on one of their songs called the MTA. This guy is on the Boston subway system and can't get off because they raised the fare while he's on the train, and he doesn't have any more money, so he's just riding forever on the MTA. Anyway, he took this solo, which just caught my ears, and I've interviewed a lot of people, and I'd say, well, what got you into the banjo? Which is kind of a silly, what was it about the banjo that attracted you? The sound, it's the sound. I mean, it has that sparkling.
A lot of times, though, it's because it was the instrument that was lying around the house, and so I grabbed it.
Well, it's sort of like Bill Monroe was in that situation.
Right.
His older brothers. Charlie was, I guess Birch was the oldest, and there was a fiddle, so I'll take the fiddle. Charlie said, I'll take the guitar. And then Bill Monroe had the mandolin left over.
The last left over.
And as John Hartford said, Bill Monroe was a fiddler in a mandolin player's body, something to that effect. But anyway, I chose the banjo.
Right.
It chose me, as the case may be.
And I liked what you said about your big plan, where there was no plan, it just sort of happened, and
I never
today.
I never decided. Okay, I think yes, I'm going to play the banjo for a living. I just always was. And
Well, I know you're involved with the Artist Works.
Right.
You want to tell us some stuff about that? I know that's a great program.
Artist Works is a great program. It's a company out in Napa, California, and they came up with this idea, this couple came up with this idea to have music videos, or a music, online music program that you can subscribe to. And in my case, I'm doing banjo. They've got a whole bluegrass thing now going on, as well as top jazz players and top classical musicians. So it's an ever-expanding thing. But basically, I flew out there 6 years ago, and in 4 days filmed. And they do a 3-camera shoot. But anyway, I filmed 150 lessons, and from beginning to way advanced.
And you're very involved in lessons before, weren't you?
I've written books, a bunch of books,
Yeah.
done some homespun tape videos, and teaching one-on-ones. And this is my final resting place, teaching-wise. I'm really happy here because in addition to the lessons, people can send in videos, which I critique. It's not a Skype thing, but it goes into a queue, and then I respond to it.
And do you have many students that have been with you for a long time through that?
I've had people. I started
beginning?
about 6 years ago, and I've had people who have been there the entire time, which is really great. It's wonderful. And some people come and go, but I've got a good solid student base, and it's a great. I mean, I'm not plugging it. I'm just saying it's a really nice situation.
Let me ask
It's a very
you,
supportive kind of atmosphere.
You've played with so many everybody, and is there anyone? I want to ask you, the guy from the Kingston Trio. Did you ever get to play with him?
I never got to play with him, but I met him. I was in a group called Skyline in the '80s, and our guitar player at the time said, "You'll never guess who's here tonight." We were playing in New Hampshire, and I said, it could be anybody. I have no idea. And it was Dave Guard, who happened to live nearby and came by to see the show.
Just to see the show?
And he introduced us for the second half of the show. He introduced us. And then I hung out with him at the end of the night for a little bit. And here's the guy without whom, maybe I would never have discovered the banjo without this guy. It's hard to say, but because I'd heard Pete Seeger, my parents played his music in the house, when I was growing up, his solo albums and the Weaver. So I'd heard banjo music, and Pete's the greatest, and the older I get, the more I love his playing. But it didn't hit me at the time, but hearing Dave Guard, so it was just an amazing thing to meet him and talk to him as peers,
Yeah.
Because when I was a kid, it was like the Kingston Trio, gods who walk the earth, And so it was, and he said, "Come up and visit sometime," and I just never got around to it. And then
How
he
did
died,
you two guys meet?
I was looking for talent for my. I used to produce a weekly arts magazine for New Jersey Public Television. It's called State of the Arts, and so I was always looking for some New Jersey connection as an excuse to bring an artist on the show or to do something about their work. And I guess I read a review of Tony's World Turning CD, and for almost selfish reasons, I knew as soon as I heard that CD that I wanted to meet this guy and talk to him about, how he uncovered all this banjo history and then turned it into a creative piece of music playing. But then I was able to get him on the show, and that gave me an excuse to go and interview him and get to know him.
Do other documentaries besides this one?
Yeah.
Were they music related?
Mostly, yeah. I've done. I did something on a jazz musician, a stride jazz pianist named Willie the Lion Smith, who was actually a mentor for Duke Ellington and Billy Taylor, among others. And I also have done things related to vaudeville and American musicals. The PBS series Broadway, the American Musical. I wrote a couple of the episodes of that, and then I also wrote a book called From Bowery to Broadway, which is dealing with the early years of vaudeville. And
So it's a lot of historical things, thus the flavor that I noticed about the history on this. Interesting.
Yeah,
But
the
now,
history
during
has a lot.
vaudeville, was it a 4-string or a 5-string banjo that they would play?
Mostly four-string. I mean, part of the reason the four-string was developed was to have an instrument that could be heard in a big hall, too, and also something that could be tuned to play with, with orchestras. And it was often used as a second instrument by people who also played, violin or other string instruments.
Would the basic difference between the 4-string and the 5-string be picking and strumming?
No, it's tuned completely. It's often tuned completely different too.
Well, yeah. Well,
I mean,
but I mean, like you don't strum a 5-string, do you? I haven't seen
Well,
that.
you could. I mean, it depends on. You can do anything with any
can,
banjo.
yeah,
you can
right.
finger pick on a
Right.
4-string banjo. You could. It's whatever you can.
Whatever
What you can
works.
imagine. I mean, there are two kinds of 4-string banjos. There's the tenor and the plectrum. The plectrum has the same scale length as the 5-string banjo, and it's tuned similarly, but not exactly the same. And the tenor is totally a different machine.
How's it tuned? It's 4 strings. The tenor and the.
Well, the
like-
tenor is tuned like a viola,
Okay.
and the plectrum, as you said, is similar to the 5-string without the thumb string, but there's one string that's different.
The 4-string is, instead of tuned to a G chord, the 4-string is tuned to a C, and then GBD.
So, did you, Tony, play the 4-string?
No, I never did. Again, it's a whole different beast.
Right, it's another beast.
When I heard Dave Gard, he was playing kind of Scruggs style, his version of Scruggs style, and then I asked someone, where can I play more of this? Where can I hear more of this? And they said, don't listen to Earl Scruggs. I went, aha.
Well, I assume
was it.
being, to get Steve Martin to be the narrator of the documentary is a home run, no matter how you slice anything with Steve Martin involved. I
Yeah.
assume, Tony, you that must have been your involvement there. I've seen you on Letterman with Steve Martin numerous times and other programs. Do you still do work with him?
Not right now, because I started getting involved with him. I had this double banjo bluegrass spectacular album
Right,
I
yeah,
was
right.
working on, and I asked his people, as it were, if he'd be willing to be on it, and he said yes. And anyway, so he recorded a couple of tunes on there, one called "The Crow," and then we just would, he lives in New York. Well, he lives in a number of places, but he has an apartment in New York City. I live in New Jersey, so we would get together and just banjo out, and he was playing some tunes, and I was saying, you should do an album. You've got a whole album worth, just about an album's worth of material. And he had an idea to do a Steve Martin, I can't remember what he was going to call it, but an album kind of under his auspices, but he'd do like 4 or 5 tunes, and then I would do a few tunes, and Van Fleck would do, sort of be like the banjo show or something. And then he, I'm not saying I was the one that suggested it necessarily, but he decided he did have enough material for an album. John McEwen produced his first album, but I did some pre-production work. I found the studio and got the musicians together. So that's how it was kind of through the double
Was
banjo
that with
bluegrass
Steve?
spectacular.
Steve wasn't involved. Steve Canyon
No,
wasn't
they
involved.
didn't. After the first album came out, he decided rather than having musicians who were like, oh, I've got a gig, and then you call them up. Can you make it? No, I'm busy.
Right,
And then
yeah.
call some. Let's have a steady band that can really do this, and it's an actual band, a pre-existing band.
Yeah.
Because the people I was calling were people that would play with me, but not in a full-time sort of a way. So anyway, he his wife Ann knew this band, the Steep Canyon Rangers, because she's from North Carolina. They're from North Carolina, and she suggested them, and there you go.
There you go. Yeah, that's he's done a lot for bluegrass, no question
Oh,
about that.
geez,
He
yeah.
really has. Yeah, so that's a home run. I like though. I heard an interview. I guess it was one of the guys from Steve Canyon, and they said they hadn't seen Steve Martin in a while, and they said, like a few months or so, and they asked him, so what have you been up to? And he responds like, "Oh, I wrote a play."
Right, I know. That happened to me, on a number of occasions. Yeah, what have you been up to? Oh, I have a new novel coming out. Oh, okay. I'm curating an exhibit by this Canadian artist. Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a musical coming to Broadway. It's just
Yeah.
like,
I've
he's
always,
amazing.
I've always loved him, obviously like everyone, and thought the world of him. But the one thing he did that I just never forget is when you guys were on Letterman and Scruggs was on with him, and so it was the end of the show, and Letterman introduced said here, Steve Martin plays it, and then Letterman walks over and goes, "Oh, this is great band you have, your band, and Steve Martin, he was like, whoa, this isn't my band, and he introduced all of you guys and saying, these are the guys, and I thought that was real great of him to do
Yeah,
that.
he's so gracious. That was actually Pete Warnick did the Scruggs thing. That was a separate thing, but I was on doing my thing with him, and we did The Crow. And at the end of the show, Letterman comes over, and he never asks who's in the band, but he came over to me and said, "Oh, can you introduce the band?" I've never seen him do that before.
Really?
And I'm sure Steve said to Letterman, "Ask Tony to,"
That's cool.
And we did the Regis show one time, and so around the same time to promote the album, just the two of us as a duo. And so Regis comes over to Steve and says, what did he say? "Oh, I understand you just got married." And Steve said, "Yeah, to Tony." And that was in the place cracks up, but he was putting the focus on me.
Right.
And then Regis came over to me and started talking to me.
Who
'Cause
was some of
he's
the
that
other,
guy.
like Steve Martin, everyone loves him, he's done so much. Who else have you played with that's that not that would impress us, that impressed you?
Earl Scruggs.
Yeah.
That was pretty big. He was also on the Double Banjo album.
Was that the first time you played with him?
I think so. I think that was the first time. Yeah, and we're practicing Farewell Blues, and I'm knee to knee with Earl Scruggs, and it's like, when I was a kid, I could have pictured someday you're going to do this. And it's
That,
like-
that was for me, one of the biggest thrills in Give Me the Banjo was the day we went to Earl's living room with Tony and Bela, and the three of them sat there and picked. And I can't get any closer to heaven than that.
Right,
you know?
right.
And that was
And I'm
just,
so glad you have that on film
Yes.
for all time.
Yeah.
That's there.
yeah, that's there.
You can
And-
make a whole film just out of that alone.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Well, how could people see the documentary?
Give Me the Banjo is available as a download. I believe we're streaming from iTunes and Amazon. I think you can still get the DVD online if you just look up Give Me the Banjo. And I think even Walmart has it.
And you said there's some bonus footage that sounded
Yeah,
interesting.
if you get the DVD rather than the download, there's like 30 minutes of extra material that didn't make it into the broadcast, including a great little visit with Ralph Stanley at his own museum, which is kind of a trip to have somebody tour, give you a tour of their own museum. And a fairly lengthy segment on Uncle Dave Macon, which I really wanted to desperately have in the finished cut, but PBS gave me a very rigid time limit, as well as stuff on four-string banjo. There's something about David Holt in there,
Right? Nice, yeah.
and performance by Taj Mahal.
Oh, wow.
And then another one by Rhiannon Giddens.
Yeah. Oh,
So that's all in the extras. That's not even in the regular show.
yeah, that's great. So it definitely, it's a documentary that anyone who plays the banjo should have, and if you know someone who plays the banjo, it's a great gift. Tony, you said you have a upcoming project that you're...
Yes, this is something I've been working on for about 6 years, not as long as the documentary, but 6 or 7 years. And it's not like full-time by any means, but I keep chinking away at it. And it's basically a Civil War story. I've written songs not in the style of the Civil War, those songs, but just the way I write them. And it's kind of a through story about a woman, about a riverboat gambler who marries this woman who's come from Ireland to find a better life. And I won't get into the whole
So
story.
it's a perspective of somebody...
It tells a story from
Tells a
beginning
story.
to end, and ends with a reunion of Civil War veterans in 1937 or 38. I can't remember which. So this actually happened. While I was researching this, I found this, came upon on YouTube, this footage of these Civil War veterans getting together, veterans of the Gettysburg Battle. And, they're getting off the trains, and they're in wheelchairs. I mean, they're in their 80s and 90s.
What gave you the idea to do something like this?
I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm a Civil War buff, but it's just a period of our history that has always fascinated me.
Well, the documentary, I won't give anything away, but I found some interesting things stated about the Civil War on that I thought was Very spectacularly
Right.
interesting.
So this isn't like heavy-duty history. It's just kind of
Right.
telling a story of this couple, and he goes to war, and the great train robberies in there. And I found out I was in Asheville, North Carolina, not that long ago, and some friends of mine, the husband works at a college there, and they found this slave graveyard, which they've been not quite excavating. I mean, it was there, but they kind of cleared it and delineated it. And there was this guy who was a slave in the 1840s, 50s, maybe the 1850s. He became the grave digger for this plantation owner. When a slave died, he buried them in this slave graveyard, and they just put a stone, with no marking on it, just a stone over the grave. And then other plantation owners would send their deceased slaves to this graveyard, and it just, when we went there and you see these stones, and they would just be buried in a wicker basket or something. It was just like such an amazing, moving story. And this guy lived into the 20s, and his master freed him in 1865 because he could see the war was being lost by the Confederacy, and so he figured, not that being a slave owner makes you benevolent, but it was a benevolent move to free him. He said you should join join the Union Army because that way you'll get a pension. Because for all these emancipated slaves, okay, you're free. Now what?
Now what? Right.
But at least he would have a pension. So I wrote a song about this gentleman. So that's part of the story. I mean, it's just, when you start
Are you
doing a
planning on
project
having
like this,
Are you planning on having like a booklet involved, like on the double banjo? You had a booklet. that
well,
was-
yeah, a lot of CDs have booklets with them.
Is that, are you going to plan on? You
I'd
don't
like
know
to.
yet?
Yeah, it's, I mean,
Because
I'm
it's
going
a
to
lot
start.
of,
I'm
stuff.
going to start recording in December, and we'll see.
Oh.
It'll start formulating itself.
Well.
I mean, I've written about 2/3 of the tunes now, and I'm going to finish it off
That's great.
and do that. So that's the next project.
Well, thanks for sitting down with me, guys.
Pleasure.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much.
Thank you.
All
It's been
righty.
a pleasure.